Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I'm your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Check out our on-demand material. Some of our previous recorded webcasts are now available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, Paul, let's get into our leadership articles this week.
Yes.
Look at them yet?
Dig into it. Briefly, very briefly. I got in late today.
Well, the first one, I like the first one because I'm an early riser. The key to better focus and higher productivity: work early in the morning. 4 reasons why. I'm up at 6:15 every morning. It's primarily because I have to get my son to the Air Force Academy, but I'm always up and ready to go first thing in the morning. And I thought this article was a little interesting because it talks about some of the reasons why, if you work early in the morning, you're more productive. One, there's less mental clutter, right? You haven't spent the whole day already addressing emails and all the issues of the day, so you're a little less kind of cluttered when it comes to early morning. You have fewer distractions. People may not be in the office yet or online, so they're not bugging you.
Unless you have a baby, and then that really threw me through a loop. My youngest is 2. And it really cut into my morning time, and it forces you to be innovative and flexible, right? But now that he's 2, he's in a much better routine sleeping, so I can get back to that early morning time. So that, life throws a monkey wrench in that. But I completely agree for just even those 2 reasons you mentioned already. Morning time is great. If I can drag myself out of bed at 5 and start work, just like crawl to the office. Right? Maybe make your coffee the night before. Like, there's all like little tricks. Like, I, have my desk set up. I got my headphones, my computer glasses. Maybe I pre-make some coffee or have something really, to drink already ready. So basically, you just get up and go to work, right? And that is uninterrupted time typically, because not many people are up during that time, again, unless you have a baby. So that 5 to 7:30 is an awesome time to catch up on work. And I do find I'm way more productive too.
And here's the good news. As the kids get older, they sleep in.
Yeah. So you get more time. Yeah, because like I got to get my kids out at 7:30 if they're going to school, right? Or camp or something, right? Camp is a little later. This morning it was like 8 a.m. I got to, an extra half an hour. But, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, the other 2 on here, which were interesting, you have higher willpower in the morning to kind of get through things, and you procrastinate less. Again, it's kind of the first thing in the day. You don't kind of you try to get it done. Later in the day, you have a tendency to procrastinate. You're tired. You've been dealing with all the items of the day, and you're just like, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, right? Less likely to do that first thing in the morning just because you haven't had all the issues of the day.
Yeah, I mean, working late at night is difficult. It is very different. I've tried both based on, basically because of my kid's schedule, right? I've had to be more flexible and go, okay, it's 10 o'clock at night. I gotta go get some work done. It is a lot harder to focus. And there's that balance of sleep. So if you drink a coffee at 9, 10 o'clock at night, right? Like, when are you going to come down off of that to actually get some sleep, to be up? And then how do you manage that schedule where, okay, what nights am I going to work late, and what mornings am I going to work early, and when am I going to use a day to catch up on sleep? And, having continuity, I think, is really important, but life always throws, monkey wrenches in, especially if you have a family. So that can be a difficult thing to do. I'm really, I think, moving forward, really going to latch onto that early morning. I think that's the best way to do it. And a lot of articles you read, especially ones we've talked about on the show, always show the people working early in the morning. I also think it's important to get some exercise in there too. And maybe do both. Maybe you're listening to a webcast or a book or something while you're on the treadmill first thing in the morning. A couple times a week, and then the other mornings you're working. So that's the schedule, me personally, that I'm looking to build.
Yeah. Well, my motto is caffeine only in the morning, liquor at night, and I fall asleep just fine.
There you
and
go.
Just start that routine over again. So we're all good. The second article kind of ties into this one a little bit. It says, kind of just get started, right? Just start. And this was an interesting article about a writer who wanted to just write every day. And instead of just sitting there waiting just start writing, right? You may change your mind, you might erase it. And it walks through this whole series of why it's important just to get a start, just do it,
Mm.
right? Kind of to this early thing, right? Just start it, right? Just start working through getting up early, kind of focusing your activities. And at the end of the article, he kind of boils it down to the 4 points, right? Just one, just start. Two, set some goals and plans, but he says ignore the noise. And I think that's where it gets interesting in the early morning is there is less noise first thing in
Hmm.
the morning to actually get started in doing something. And so these two articles kind of tied together on that front of work early, but to do it, you just got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and I think it's not for everyone. Certainly, I know many people that I've worked with over the years that are just better at night. Like they're just night owls, right? And if I'm up late and you're pinging them on Slack and it's 1 a.m., like that's when they're working, right? But don't try and ping them when it's 9 a.m. because they're not going to respond. So everyone does work differently. That's important. But to talk about just getting started, it's something that Ed Scotus, who's given me a lot of great advice over the years and is a dear friend, when we were talking about creating specifically courseware material, right? It's kind of proven how Ed works. Is Ed has an amazing work ethic, and so that's kind of another tip is to find someone who already has developed an amazing work ethic and ask them questions, right? And so I'd ask it like, you've got so many slides you might need to create for your courseware. I'm like, how do you get all those done and how do you get unstuck? He's like, there is a perfect formula that he has for developing some courseware or specifically a slide. You may have that for your own presentation, whether you're presenting that internally at work or whether you're presenting at a conference or you're presenting for your business, right? All those different scenarios. And he said, exactly what this article says. He's like, sometimes you just got to start putting stuff down, right? And I do this in all the content we create here for Security Weekly. If I'm stuck at any point, I'm like, I just got to get my ideas out. Like, I'm just going to start throwing stuff on slides, rearranging, reformatting. I mean, Matt, you've personally seen that. I think even with our current sales deck is I'm starting to put data there, and some of it is a little more polished right now, and other needs a little work. But I got to get the ideas of where I'm going. And sometimes you just got to create something and start working with it. I think it's easier to start with some content that you can mold and shape than sit there and just try and figure out like, what is this slide ultimately going to look like and have it just happen. It usually doesn't. I mean, sometimes a couple slides usually happen like that, but it's maybe 2 or 3 out of the 60 that I'm building that actually, end up like that too. And that goes for writing in any content you're creating. I like to just start putting stuff down and then, like it's that basically like a lump of clay and you just keep kind of molding and shaping until it becomes a nice clay pot or whatever you're making, right?
Yeah. And the one, when I was doing the keynotes for RSA conference, sometimes I use another article that's a little later in the deck,
Yep.
in the list is distill your message down to 15 words, right? What is that theme you're trying to get done?
Mm,
Whether it's a presentation or an article, figure out what that short message is you're trying to do. And then you can iterate through various versions of slides and content
yeah.
and materials, right? And so whenever I was doing a keynote presentation, I had to come up with that first theme. What is that message I'm trying to get across?
Mm-hmm.
And that gives me kind of that brainstorming exercise to start creating some content, some slides, but then you're just constantly iterating through it, trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way I want to get that message across? And so that helps sometimes in getting started is nail that message first.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know. I tend to do a mixture. Like I'll have a message, develop a bunch of stuff, and then go back and tweak my message, and then go, well, based on all the content that I just created, kind of off my version 1 of my message. Now I'm gonna go back and tweak my message. Now I've got 40 slides that I need to condense down and take out. I think you work very similarly, right? Like you end up with a lot of slides, and you've seen some of my presentations. And you're like, all right, now let's condense it down and start taking out the ones that don't support my message. And I think that's super important when you're presenting, especially in the context of this show, right? Where one of the goals is to really help you as professionals present to your management, present to your developer team. And I think that the shorter, the better. And that the shorter you have to present, the more difficult it's going to be to get your message across. And it's actually harder, right, to write a shorter article than a longer one. And that's definitely some good advice to help you get there.
Yeah, even with keynotes, right? When I would
Yeah.
do the first one in Singapore, typically based on the schedule, you have this idea of the message, and then you build the content, and you realize that you've already created kind of version 2.0 of what you wanted to do. So the next one, you already have some of those tweaks from a messaging perspective in place, because now you're evolving that message on the same path, by the way, but then kind of updated based on the content you produce for the first one. It kind of iterates into version 2, 3, and 4 down the road. And so you could always reuse content, but then target it differently to your audience, right? That's the other thing that was in this article, is know your audience. When I would
Mm-hmm.
go into Singapore, you know, that audience is different than when you go into Abu Dhabi or into the US. Those
Sure.
audiences are all a little different. So how do you tie your message in a way they understand it and can relate to it, because they all think about security a little differently based on their maturity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What else you
All
got, man?
right. No, you have another one, Paul?
No, I was just asking what else you have in here, man. I think there might be a slight
Oh
delay.
gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a slight delay thanks to the internet.
Mhm.
Um, this article on your product backlog is full of garbage. I having done a lot of product management work in my past, this was a very interesting article of how your backlog gets full of stuff that you probably don't need to do or shouldn't do, and just kind of adds up in the garbage list. And so um, anybody who's in the product side, who's building out features and stories for a roadmap. It's a
Mm.
really good article on how to go back and look at your backlog and start to weed out stuff that shouldn't be there anymore. It might have been a good idea when you wrote it, but now it's not relevant, but it's still sitting in your backlog, right? Um, it also talks about how to get maintenance activities and bugs out of your backlog and making sure that you're addressing them up front. And just some good tips here on how to manage a product backlog. That was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and certainly if we think about our own internal product and you look at what's in the backlog, that things have changed so much since you've looked at them that it's exactly what the article's saying. You're like, oh, well, that's not relevant anymore, therefore we got to throw it out, right? And I think it's important to keep up with that, because likely the reason it's in your backlog could be because it's a more significant amount of work than a lot of other things. Also, it wasn't as important at the time, and therefore it's in your backlog. So now you get something that takes a long time that may or may not align with what your product is trying to accomplish, and those are pretty easy things once you go through to weed out and say, nope, forget it, or change them into something that maybe does take time but is more relevant to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and the article talks about, think about your these activities as solutions or fragments, right? What are you trying to solve with that story? And so labeling your stories in this concept of, is it tied to a solution or fragment of solution, actually helps you organize them and decide whether they're still relevant in your backlog.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's a very good tip. Let's see, what else do I have here? This is the one I want to talk about. I love this article. 9 out of 10 people are willing to earn less money to do more meaningful work. This is a great article that talks about some surveys that they've done across multiple industries. This isn't just the security industry, about people who would actually be willing to take less money to have meaningful work. This is a big thing for me. I've talked a little bit about being a persister. Persisters are all about doing the right things and having meaning and purpose in your work life. And this article kind of reemphasizes that your employees want to do things that are impactful, that make a difference. And how do you structure work for your employees to incentivize them to feel part of the organization and into the overall goal? They're willing to make less money to do this kind of work, which I thought was really interesting, because I think most people think we just do it for the money, but not everybody does.
Well, I think having meaning and purpose is a huge thing for employee health, right? And I think that not even willing to earn less money, but willing to put up with, a lot of, there's someone banging. I don't know what's going on. There's some construction work going on, but, they're willing to, I was talking about this with my wife, right? And I think your wife also works in the medical field, and it's so different from what we do, right? Largely what we do is sit behind a desk and develop presentations like we're talking about and have conference calls. And you look into the medical field and you have to deal with the general public, which is a huge variable, and things can go in a number of different directions. Now, fortunately, it doesn't always go in the wrong direction. And there's certainly very specific stories that my wife has where it was on TV, right? Like the patient just went crazy and, started attacking people. And she's like, fortunately, that doesn't happen all the time. But she knows that what she's doing has meaning and purpose, right? So therefore, when that happens, they know it's part of the job and it's a lessons learned, like what can we do organizationally to do better? If she's at a good organization, they do a lessons learned on that. What can we do to protect everyone's safety, right? The patient, the people that work there, the security guards, everyone has to be, protected. But if they have meaning and purpose, they understand that that's part of it. I don't think they're leaning on the organization to say that should never happen and we all want pay raises, right? So meaning and purpose is a huge driver for success of your organization.
Yeah, and what constitutes an emergency in their world is very different than ours, right?
Very different, yeah. There's people's lives at stake.
You got to put it in context.
I mean, in our field too, there are cases where there are certainly lives at stake, but it's much less of a direct line, right? I mean, they're in the direct line in those situations. So working at healthcare, both from the working in that field and applying information technology and security in that field is just, I think a different ball of wax and a lot more things to consider when patient safety and the health of patients is at risk.
Agreed. This article is why the tech industry needs a moral compass. Now, the article starts out really talking about our impact on society from our technological improvements. As you get later into the article, though, it gives some good tips about think about what we're doing in technology and what the impact on the human element is. Sometimes we think about innovation for the sake of innovation, but what's the impact to the person? And there's aspects of this article I liked, and there's parts I don't like, but I do think it's important for us to realize either the good or the harm that our products could do, and therefore think about those elements as you're thinking about developing new products. We just did the last segment on SOAR. To me, SOAR is a huge impact to the human side of where we have a limitation of industry resources here in the security industry, that these tools can actually help us augment that gap in resources where other technologies maybe they don't, right? And so I like just thinking about that from what's the impact to us as humans.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the privacy certainly and data protection that we've covered on the show plays into this. We've seen Facebook really change as an organization and how society has reacted to that. I mean, personally, and I'm sure you listeners and Matt, right, we fall in this category of knowing a lot of people that have actually dropped off Facebook because of all the issues they've had. And I think that certainly speaks to that moral compass and, being transparent with what you're doing with people's data, how that's being, stored, who it's being shared with. Those are all things we talk about in the privacy realm that I think really directly relate to this article. That's super important. Sure, we can all be more connected, but what negative impacts does it have on society?
Yeah, and why security is important in protecting that data. I've never had a Facebook account, but a lot of people have dropped off. I've tried to limit my exposure to some of that privacy concern, but yeah, other people, if they know the risks, they're willing to take the risk, but we need to be upfront and honest about it.
Right. And then there are certain benefits that you have from social media, giving, groups within a country a voice and an ability to communicate, marking people safe in a disaster. So there are things on the positive side of that moral compass that I think we need to focus on, less so than a platform to have political debates, which is, obviously really annoying. Do you want to spend your time commenting on that stuff? There's so many more, I think, positive things that we can get from that connectedness, but also raising the issues of security in those. I think we're likely to see a lot of different authentication technologies, would be my prediction, evolve over time. There's certainly some vendors that we're looking at that have the ability to really improve things from the authentication and password kind of side of it in multi-factor authentication. But I think there's a lot of improvements that'll come there that will help keep people much safer from identity theft and account takeovers, which are so prominent today.
Agreed. Love the identity space. So this last article ties it all back together, right? Cybersecurity and AI are the most sought after careers in 2019. So this is an interesting survey done by Spiceworks talking about IT hiring and cybersecurity being the most sought after hire in 2019. So our industry is continuing to grow. The need for cybersecurity resources are definitely something that we're going to continue to see, and we're going to see more and more companies hiring these types of professionals. So that's good for all of us in the industry. Lots of job opportunities out there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting, we talk about AI, and I know I've seen it presented where machine learning is part of AI, and I get that, and we tend to try and separate it out slightly differently, not to confuse the terms when we're talking about solutions. However, when we look at the skills side of things, I think it's Springboard actually that has a degree program in machine learning, and I would certainly assume that would touch on AI as well. And I think that's super important, as we've seen in many vendors, some rightfully so, some maybe not so rightfully so, using these terminologies and embedding this technology inside of their products. I absolutely think that's a skill that we're going to see more of. And it's not just coming into our industry, right? But it's now expanding out into lots of other industries. If you look at the insurance industry, they've always had those predictive models, which is essentially a form of machine learning. And now I see that trickling out into other industries, driving the need for those skills, which is great. And of course, I mean, cybersecurity as well, right? I mean, as more things become more invested in technology and take advantage of technology, we're going to need people that can apply security for that.
Yeah, security of the routine, security of the data, all the things that are driving that innovation are things we need to protect. And so that keeps us all employed for hopefully a long time to come. All right, Paul, those were my articles for the week. You got anything else for us?
How do you not be late? I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, yeah, this one was an interesting one. It was the last one I pulled up on Friday. And it talks a lot about you personally. It's something you have to look inside, and a lot of reasons why people are late. They talk about the maybe it's fear, depending on what you're going to, and so you go late because you're a little scared. And it talks about confronting your fears and really kind of looking at yourself to change your approach and to kind of fight this being late habit, I guess is a good way to put it. So, and then also said live in reality, in that you think you can do more things in a day sometimes than you can. And so the other thing here is, once you kind of confront your fears, if fear is driving being late, the other one is make sure you understand what your schedule looks like and give yourself enough time in the day, because we have a tendency, and you and I do this all the time, is we'll go over in a meeting. Well, that impacts the next meeting and the next meeting. And then eventually we end up being late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we got to space our meetings out a little more.
Yes, I agree. We should have some time between. That's a great tip. Also, we live and die by the calendar, and calendaring is a technology that we use that has some issues, right? And I think if I have to go back to the times where I've been late or missed a meeting, a certain percentage of those are really because I trusted the technology too much and didn't have enough checks and balances in place to allow that to happen. So be very, very scrutinize your calendaring and put some extra checks and balances in there, as I find that often in our world anyway, I think leads to being late, because there's calendaring. We've been using it for so long, ever since I think when I first got to university. I don't know if I had it in the late 90s. Did Lotus have a calendaring? Yeah, they did. And you think about how far it's come, but how much we have to go in making that completely foolproof is we're not quite there, right? And
Well,
one of the things I notice is iCal on my Mac. I can't rely on that to sync correctly with Google Calendar, and that could be very specific to me. But I've learned not to trust that as well, and go check my actual calendar on Google in a web browser is just one thing. And you have to investigate those things and adjust moving forward. Also, a actual human being that's checking on everyone's calendars is important. Thank you, Sam.
Well, I think for us, one of the challenges we have is we let other people put appointments on our calendar, and we only give ourselves a 15-minute gap. And sometimes when we're doing a presentation or we're having a call and we're not distilling the message down succinctly and we go over, we don't have a lot of buffer in our calendars then, since other people are putting them on our calendar for us.
Yeah, and that's awesome technology. And it's actually Michael Sant'Arcangelo that had turned us on to that technology, as when he was doing his and still doing his advisory work, right? That's how he operated. And I was like, that's fascinating. And I've seen a lot more people latch on to that automatic calendaring, but it does require, again, extra attention. I've had to adjust, my blackout. Like if I'm trying to get here in the office, someone's booking a meeting at 9, and I know that, my kid's bus can be a few minutes late, I'm like running into the office. I'm like, let's avoid that scenario entirely, right? Give ourselves time in the morning to plan out our day and not take meetings during that time, unless it's, some kind of exception, which you have to allow for too.
Agreed. That's making sure we got the right times blocked out on our calendar so we're not too crammed.
Right. Awesome. Good show today. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you, and everyone. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.